This video is a special localized version of one of the most popular episodes from my main Japanese YouTube channel, where I dive deep into the history of game consoles and the stories behind legendary developers. I'm excited to finally share this history with a global audience. Do you think you know everything about Nintendo's Famicom, better known overseas as the NES? The gray cartridges, the plastic texture of the console, and that little ritual of blowing into the cartridge before inserting it. For many of us, that was the entire image of the 8-bit era, at least outside of Japan. In 1986, Nintendo made a decision that would shock the gaming world, not with a new console, but with something far stranger. It was called the Famicom Disk System, a strange red device that pushed the Famicom beyond the limits of cartridges. It introduced something revolutionary for its time, the ability to save your progress, and through special rewrite costs, players could even buy new games at a lower price. In many ways, it felt like technology from the future, and in Japan, it became a sensation. Legendary games like The Legend of Zelda and Metroid were born on this system. But here's the mystery. Despite its success, the disk system never launched in North America or Europe. Why did Nintendo keep this revolutionary machine locked inside Japan? Only one place outside Japan ever received it, Hong Kong. So why didn't Nintendo bring this revolutionary system to the rest of the world? And why did the disk system, once so bright and promising, quietly disappear from the stage? Today, we're going to uncover the story behind Nintendo's overly ambitious experiment, a piece of gaming history that lived in the shadow of the cartridge. By the mid-1980s, Nintendo faced a serious dilemma. The Famicom was a massive hit, but its very heart, the ROM cartridge, was starting to hold the business back. The cause? Trade tensions between Japan and the United States, stretching all the way across the Pacific. At the time, Japanese semiconductor manufacturers were flooding the US with cheap ROMs. The American semiconductor industry was screaming in protest. In response, the US government hit back with strict sanctions and import restrictions on Japan. The result? The very chips used to make ROM cartridges soared in price. The more cartridges Nintendo produced, the more their profits were squeezed. A nightmare scenario for any hardware manufacturer. But there was another problem for the players. At the time, ROMs were only a few hundred kilobytes in size. Developers dreamed of creating larger, more immersive worlds. Players longed to pick up where they left off. In other words, a save feature. Yet the technology needed to make this possible, larger ROMs and backup batteries, was far too expensive back then. Cheap, high capacity, rewritable. As if by magic, Nintendo found a solution to this impossible challenge. Their eyes fell on a technology that was just starting to gain traction in the world of personal computers, the floppy disk. The soaring cost of semiconductors had a direct and painful impact. The price of the games themselves. Retail prices began to skyrocket. For Nintendo, this wasn't just a business problem. It was a crisis of philosophy. At its core, Nintendo held a powerful conviction: games should be accessible. They believed every child should have the chance to explore new worlds and experience countless adventures. But high prices were building a wall around those worlds. The very kids Nintendo wanted to reach were being priced out of the fun. Nintendo was originally a company that made its name in arcade games. Donkey Kong, Mario Brothers. In that world, a single coin could grant anyone an equal shot at thrilling, unknown adventures. Arcades were always designed to keep the barrier to play low. But when the battleground moved into the home, a harsh reality emerged. To play their favorite games freely at home, players faced an initial investment that dwarfed anything in the arcade. A small fortune, a heavy financial burden, was suddenly pressing down on their shoulders. Adding fuel to the fire was the economic problem we mentioned earlier. If Nintendo continued with the ROM cartridge system, game prices would keep soaring, turning them into a luxury item far out of reach for children. It was a very visible future. Could we maintain the same sense of accessibility at home, the kind of play you'd get in the arcades for a single dollar? For Nintendo, a company with arcade DNA, the rising cost of cartridges posed a crisis. It felt like the very foundation of their business was being challenged. Cornered and under pressure, Nintendo took a bold gamble, not just an incremental improvement on what already existed, but a challenge that turned conventional wisdom on its head, coming from an entirely new direction. If the cost of integrated circuits is holding back the future of gaming, why not switch to a medium that doesn't rely on them at all? a radical reversal of thinking. Nintendo's new vision was something unimaginable for home consoles at the time, and that was the Famicom Disk System, a low-cost magnetic medium that didn't require expensive semiconductors. It was Nintendo's declaration of war, a way to bypass the political storm of trade tensions and deliver affordable, massive amounts of play to children. The medium chosen for the disk system was immediately recognizable: a magnetic disc encased in a protective plastic shell. Inside, there was only a disc coated with a magnetic material. No expensive integrated circuits were used at all. Made entirely of plastic, this medium was extremely easy to mass produce, and the more you made, the lower the cost, fully leveraging the benefits of economies of scale. But this decision brought more than just cost savings. Nintendo had another major goal in mind. It was to break through the looming limitations of cartridge capacity. The large storage provided by the disc allowed for broader and deeper gaming experiences that were simply impossible with traditional cartridges. The economic advantage of being cheap to produce, and the creative advantage of being able to craft larger, more expansive worlds. A true 2-for-1 deal. This yellow disc was meant to be a magical ticket, delivering both affordable play and a rich gaming experience at the same time. In developing the disk system, Nintendo built the entire concept around 3 fundamental pillars. The first was making the media itself extremely inexpensive. The second was enabling game saves, allowing players to enjoy deeper experiences that could last far longer. And then, there was the third. This was the true revolution. The feature that sent Japanese kids into a frenzy. A system where the latest games could be obtained with just a few coins. The incredible disk writer rewrite system. The cost of rewriting a disk was just 500 yen. To put that into perspective for international viewers, that was roughly the price of a simple lunch, or less than half the price of a movie ticket at the time. For less than the cost of ordering your favorite pizza, you could walk away with an entirely new adventure, written directly onto the disc you already own. To make this incredible level of affordability possible, Nintendo built an entire infrastructure of disc writer costs across Japan. But Nintendo wasn't just trying to make games cheap to produce. The real question was, how do you distribute them cheaply and keep them affordable to play? Nintendo answered that question by building the entire system from both sides. Not just the hardware, but the infrastructure as well. First, Nintendo set out to shatter the price of games themselves. By fully leveraging a medium that required no expensive integrated circuits, Nintendo planned to sell disk system software at roughly half the price of traditional ROM cartridges. The latest games, for half the price. This simple yet powerful message quickly spread through households across Japan. But Nintendo's true ambition went even further. That strategy was the disk rewrite system, a move that turned the very idea of game distribution on its head. From the very first year of the disk system's launch, Nintendo rolled out an unprecedented promotion. They announced a bold plan to install nearly 10,000 dedicated rewrite terminals, known as disk writers, in toy stores and game shops across Japan. The number 10,000 wasn't just a target, it was a statement of intent. Nintendo was determined to build a nationwide network where kids could walk into a nearby store and instantly get a new game for a low price, almost like a vending machine for video games. Stores that once sold software would now become places where games could be updated and rewritten. This ambitious infrastructure was the true driving force behind the disk system, an attempt to elevate it from a simple peripheral to the center stage of a new gaming era. Here's an interesting behind-the-scenes detail. Despite building such an advanced network, the disk writer system wasn't connected online the way systems are today. So how did Nintendo distribute all the game data to thousands of machines across the country? The answer was surprisingly simple and very analog. Nintendo supplied each store with a special piece of media known as a master disc. Officially, it was called a disc, but in reality, it was more like a giant yellow ROM cartridge. When store staff installed this master cartridge deep inside the disk writer machine, the system was ready to begin rewriting games. A player would drop in a small fee, insert their disc, and data would be read from the yellow master cartridge. then written directly onto their disk right before their eyes. In other words, the disk writer was essentially a nationwide network of offline, high-speed copying machines. By physically delivering the data and duplicating it on-site, Nintendo created a system that could reliably distribute games cheaply and efficiently, even in an era when communication networks were still underdeveloped. It was a remarkably practical and surprisingly elegant solution to a technological limitation of the time, and the disk system brought one more form of relief: the freedom to save your progress. For RPG players in particular, there was a frustrating problem at the time: password systems. Long strings of characters, sometimes dozens of them, had to be carefully copied down into a notebook. One single mistake, and everything could be lost. Dozens of hours of adventure could vanish in an instant. For players, it often meant game over in the cruelest sense. The disk system freed us from that constant fear. Instead of relying on passwords, the game could write your progress directly onto the disk's magnetic surface. No more copying down long codes. No more worrying about a single typo ruining everything. Because players could reliably continue their adventure, developers were finally free to create games that were longer, deeper, and far more ambitious. The standardization of save features marked a turning point. Home video games were no longer just short arcade-style experiences. They were beginning to evolve into something more: stories as rich and immersive as novels or films. This price was almost identical to the cost of the Famicom console itself at the time. For international viewers, imagine this. It was essentially the same price as buying another NES. In other words, you had to spend the cost of an entire game system just for a single peripheral. To put it another way, it was roughly the same as buying 3 or 4 major titles at once, such as Super Mario Bros. The games were cheap, rewrites were incredibly affordable. But the gateway to it all, the hardware itself, demanded a commitment almost as big as buying the console again. That high initial cost became the first, and perhaps the greatest, hurdle Japanese kids had to overcome to obtain the key to the future that was the disk system. And when you attach it to the Famicom itself, this is what it looks like. What do you think? It has a pretty commanding presence, doesn't it? Connecting this giant red system to the Famicom itself was a crucial bridge: the RAM adapter. But this wasn't just a simple data transfer device. Inside the adapter was 256 kilobits of memory, a massive amount for its time. The Famicom itself originally had only 16 kilobits of memory. In other words, simply plugging in this adapter boosted the system's memory capacity by 16 times. The RAM adapter didn't just expand memory. It also included an additional sound chip. This chip used 6-bit programmable waveforms, allowing developers to freely shape the sound. It could even perform frequency modulation similar to FM synthesis, greatly expanding what the system could do musically. Thanks to this chip, the expressive power of Famicom sound was pushed to a whole new level. That's why games like The Legend of Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link and Yum Kojo, Doki Doki Panic have noticeably richer sound compared to typical Famicom titles. And this is the drive unit, the main body of the disk system. It uses a 2.8-inch quick disk as its storage medium. The data read from this drive is first loaded into the RAM adapter we talked about earlier, and then sent to the Famicom itself to run the game. And the goal of lowering game prices finally became a reality. Nintendo began re-releasing many of its cartridge games on the disk system. And the price? Incredibly, they were sold for about half the price of the cartridge versions. Some titles cost around 2,600 yen, which was roughly $18 to $20 at the time. Far cheaper than most cartridge games. And if you already owned a disc, you could even rewrite it with a new game for just 500 yen, which was only about $3 or $4 US. However, the clouds began to gather sooner than anyone expected. Only about 6 months after the disk system was released, a shocking new game appeared. That game was Ghosts and Goblins. So what made Ghosts and Goblins so shocking? It wasn't just the game itself. The real surprise was the size of its cartridge. This game used a 1 megabit cartridge, an enormous capacity at the time. With that single release, cartridge technology had suddenly caught up with the disk system. But the impact of this moment went far beyond simply matching the disk system in capacity. The disk system relied on a disk drive, which meant games had to load data from the disk. In other words, loading times were unavoidable. Cartridges, on the other hand, didn't really have that problem. And soon, even inside Nintendo itself, some developers began to wonder, wait a second, aren't cartridges actually good enough? Another major goal for Nintendo was freeing players from the nightmare of password systems. But even that advantage didn't last long. Just the following year, a table game called Morita Shogi introduced the first battery backup system in a cartridge. After that, battery back save memory quickly began appearing in many other cartridge games. For the disk system, only one path to survival remained: lower game prices. That was the advantage it still had over cartridges. But from this point on, Nintendo began to lose its way. The disk system was actually released in only a limited number of regions, mainly Japan and Hong Kong. Its biggest selling point was the disk writer service, which allowed players to rewrite their disks for a very low price. But that system depended heavily on physical infrastructure. Nintendo had to install disk writer machines in stores and maintain a wide service network, because building and supporting such a network overseas would have been extremely difficult. Nintendo ultimately limited the disk system's release to Japan and Hong Kong. This situation created a challenge when Nintendo wanted to release The Legend of Zelda in North America. The game had originally been developed for the disk system, but since the disk system itself was never released in North America, Nintendo needed to convert the game into a ROM cartridge. To make that possible, Nintendo equipped the cartridge with a special chip called MMC, along with a battery backup system to store save data. The MMC, or Memory Management Controller, was a special chip developed by Nintendo itself. Its purpose was to push beyond the functional limits of the Famicom, expanding what the hardware could do. But there was an irony here. By introducing these enhancement chips, Nintendo had effectively created a way to make cartridge games far more powerful and sophisticated. And once the technology existed, it didn't just benefit Nintendo. Third-party developers could use similar enhancement chips in their own cartridges as well. In a way, Nintendo had ended up whipping its own back, strengthening the very cartridge format that would compete with the disk system. There were also contradictions between Nintendo's strategies in Japan and overseas. For third-party developers, selling games at very low prices was not always attractive. And there was an even bigger concern for Nintendo. If Nintendo kept its special enhancement chips exclusive to its own games, third-party developers might start moving their projects to rival platforms instead. Because of that, Nintendo didn't really have much choice. Allowing third parties to use these technologies was, in many ways, a necessary compromise. Because of these circumstances, Nintendo's ambitious disk system began to lose its role far sooner than anyone had expected. What had once been envisioned as the future of the Famicom was fading away at a surprisingly rapid pace. And yet, despite its short lifespan, this system left a massive impact on the history of video games. So what did you think? The disk system was a unique piece of hardware that Nintendo released only in Japan and Hong Kong. For many people in other parts of the world, it's something they may have only heard rumors about, or perhaps never even known existed. If you have any thoughts or impressions after watching this video, feel free to share them in the comments. And as always, thank you very much for watching.